I'm always looking for colors. Whenever I do a score, to me, when I see a movie, I never think about themes or melodies. To me, when I see a movie, I sort of close my eyes and I say, what mood or what color, abstractly, do I feel?
At the start of the year 2000, 46-year-old James Horner was at the pinnacle of his career composing film music. Just 3 years ago, for his work on Titanic, he had won 2 of cinema's ultimate prize, the Academy Award. The following years would be challenging times for the composer, struggling to hold his place in an ever-changing industry, and would also ultimately end in unforeseen tragedy. Welcome to the third in a series of 3 programmes dedicated to the life and music of James Horner. As with programmes 1 and 2, you'll be hearing from people who worked with Horner, film music journalists, and just plain movie music fans who love and cherish his work. Of course, you will also be hearing plenty of the music which made James Horner one of the biggest names in movie music now and forever. Music engineer Chris Malone.
I think what happened for me coming into the 2000s was that generally films tended to be a bit different to what they'd been in that previous period of time. So what I think happened there was that we'd had more of the Hans Zimmer type sounds. We'd had more movement away from that traditional orchestral kind of work. And what I found really fascinating about James Horner in this time was that he was still up there and right at the front with everybody else. And what he was doing was that he was taking all of the tricks and the techniques that he'd come up with previously, and he was injecting and infusing some of these new ways of approaching it at the same time.
Academy Award nominated filmmaker and record producer Nick Redman.
Well, I think the thing that was most special to me was that he had a real gift for melody. And that melodic gift is something that doesn't come naturally to everyone. And of course, if you listen to film music today, melody plays almost no part in any film score. It's as if that craft, that skill, that gift has entirely gone away. And it's not so much the composer's fault. It is the fact that the studios and the individual directors and producers don't want any melody. They only want sound. They don't want anything to distract from what you are actually watching. Horner was probably the last of the great melodist. He was often criticized for being derivative, both of himself and others. But I always felt with him it didn't matter because he found a way to take thematic ideas or styles or concepts of how film music could work or should work, and he was able to blend it all in a very unique way, his own melodic gifts allied to a lot of the tropes and ideas that he got from pre-existing film scores and other composers' work, and he forged it all into a whole new sort of melange of incredibly affecting and compelling and often very moving work. And I think that that's really what made him unusual and special.
2000 started with Freedom's Song, directed by regular collaborator Phil Alden Robinson. Then, soon after, Horner found himself scoring music for Disaster on the High Seas. The Perfect Storm was directed by Wolfgang Petersen, based on the 1997 book of the same name by Sebastian Junger. It tells the true story of the Andrea Gale, a commercial fishing vessel that was lost at sea with all hands when 3 separate storm systems came together to create what is known as the Perfect Storm in October 1991. The film's cast included George Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, William Fichtner, John C. Reilly, Diane Lane, Karen Allen, and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. The film inspired Horner to write some of his most dramatic, descriptive and exciting music of his entire career, despite a vast proportion being literally drowned out by the sound effects in the film's final cut. Voice-over artist, radio presenter and film music journalist Tim Burden.
Perfect Storm I would rate as being particularly good. I loved his use of guitars, quite dynamic use of guitars during the main titles and then later on whenever they're trying to catch sharks. There was very effective emotional writing with John C. Reilly and his son. Again, some beautiful writing for high oboes. There's some thrilling cues whenever the boat is being rescued by the Coast Guard. There's some really exciting stuff there. There was this motif which was very like a calling. Da, 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 which is it's totally a total Horner trademark, and it was almost like a sigh of relief whenever you heard that cue. That meant they're on their way, they're to the rescue, and again, so clever, very clever spotting and scoring, and he and Wolfgang Petersen really got on like that. Music journalist Dirk Wickenden.
Yeah, I saw it at the cinema, and you actually felt like you were there climbing the rig and everything that all the men were doing in the film. It was really good on the big screen, especially these big, obviously digitally enhanced waves we know now. But again, the score worked well. Then he threw in obviously those electric guitars a couple of times in the score. And again, what's interesting also about James is when someone thought it was necessary, for an end credit song, it was 9 times out of 10 based on his melodic material in the score, so therefore it was organic and it worked. It wasn't just thrown in there because it was based on his music. It worked. So in that respect, I think James was a little bit like a modern day Dmitri Tiomkin.
Ron Howard then required Horner's services to score How the Grinch Stole Christmas. The following year, 2001, started with Horner in epic mood, working again with an old friend. Enemy at the Gates was written and directed by French director Jean-Jacques Annaud, of whom Horner had already composed music for The Name of the Rose in 1986. Although fictional, the film is loosely based on war stories told by Soviet sniper Vasily Zaitsev, played by Jude Law, surrounding the Battle of Stalingrad in the winter of 1942-43, and focuses on the Russian sniper's deadly game of cat and mouse against a German sniper played by Ed Harris. Joseph Fiennes, Rachel Weisz, Bob Hoskins and Ron Perlman also star. From Cinematic Sound Radio, Erik Woods.
Enemy at the Gates had a quiet sadness about it. It's not really visible on screen, but James Horner was able to do what all good composers do and bring out that emotion, which was living just under the surface. Again, like with most Horner's work, thematic writing comes rather easy and quickly to him. For Enemy at the Gates, the themes Horner crafted were written as simple as possible. The major themes had an epic feel to them, but were purposefully understated. The score, while mostly subdued and introspective, does contain some enormous traditional epic orchestral flair. The entire opening sequence depicting the shocking and brutal river crossing to Stalingrad and the battle that follows is accompanied by an enormous 15-minute cue. Chorus plays a huge part of the cue, and this was Horner's way of giving the score a more Russian feel without relying on something more traditional like a balalika or an accordion. And of course, as you listen through, you can hear influences of such Russian greats as Shostakovich and Prokofiev, two composers who were included in a mass of CDs that director Jean-Jacques Gounod handed to Horner as inspiration before composing. However, the only place where Horner does break out into more traditional Russian instrumentation is during the end credit cue, where mandolins and accordions play the score's central theme, a theme which we've actually heard before from Horner, and this isn't the first time he's reused his music, but we hear this theme in his 1994 score to Balto, and it's used wonderfully in this score. And of course, the infamous four-note danger motif plays a really big part in this score.
The film was poorly received in the former Soviet Union, with some Red Army veterans demanding the film to be banned. So offended were they over the film's inaccuracies of events. The film was not received well in Germany either, with a showing at the Berlin Film Festival greeted by a booing audience. Director Anand stated afterwards that he would not present another film at the festival, calling it a slaughterhouse, and claiming that his film received a far better reception elsewhere.
Beautiful Mind, of course, had Russell Crowe in it, and we wanted to find a sound. I wanted to find a sound that showed the beauty of mathematics. And how do you do that with music? And I sort of always find a visual for myself that, to me, is the analog of the sound I'm after. And I was thinking of what does mathematics really feel like to this person, this character. And it's like looking inside a kaleidoscope to me. where you're looking down and you're slowly twisting the thing and the glass is slowly changing patterns. And I wanted to write something that had exactly that quality. And I chose to write something for 4 pianos, a texture primarily for 4 pianos and orchestra. But it's a very mathematical, very precise texture. The harmonic sequence has a very unique, particular sound to it. And that's how I sort of conveyed Russell Crowe's inner mind, the beauty of what he saw when he smiled on screen, when he was looking around the room and he sees beauty in numbers. That's what I was trying to portray.
Based on a book by Sylvia Nassar about the life of John Nash, a Nobel Prize laureate in economics, and his battle against paranoid schizophrenia and the effect it brings on his wife, family and friends. A Beautiful Mind was directed by Ron Howard and starred Russell Crowe as Nash, Ed Harris, Jennifer Connelly, Paul Bettany, Judge Hirsch and Christopher Plummer. Horner's score also utilised the voice of soprano Charlotte Church in a very effective way. James Horner again.
I'm always looking for colors. Whenever I do a score, to me, when I see a movie, I never think about themes or melodies. To me, when I see a movie, I sort of close my eyes and I say, what mood or what color, abstractly, do I feel? Is it sadness? Is it like a painting? How does the painting feel when you look at it? It's much more abstract than a physical job of, God, that scene runs so long and this. So I'm always looking for colors that I think make for interesting marriages against picture. And I use vocalists quite a lot in my work, but because there's something very human about the voice. But Charlotte has this unique quality that she's neither child nor adult, and her voice is neither child or adult. I didn't want a children's voice. I didn't want a boy soprano. I didn't want an adult opera diva. I wanted something that was sort of amorphous and not quite developed and very pure. And I knew about her forever, but that was the voice I wanted.
A Beautiful Mind went on to gross over $313 million worldwide and won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Supporting Actress. It was also nominated for 4 other categories, including Best Original Score. The movie also won 4 Golden Globes and 2 BAFTAs, with Horner's music nominated in both cases, but, like the Academy Awards, not winning. But 2001 had another work from James Horner rounding off an exceptional year. Iris is the true story of acclaimed novelist Iris Murdoch, played by Kate Winslet, and in later life by Judi Dench. They portray Iris's brave battle against the ravages of Alzheimer's disease, and supported by her loyal husband John Bailey, played by Hugh Bonneville and later Jim Broadbent, in an Academy Award-winning performance. Directed by Richard Eyre and co-produced by BBC Films and Miramax, featuring violin solos by Joshua Bell, Horner treated the score as concert work, presenting the music on the album as an 8-part piece without cue titles. Film music fan Adam Cousins.
Well, I think there was a stage in the 2000s where as much as I loved James Horner's music, I didn't find it quite as interesting as I had the early 80s. And it was only really, I suppose, A Beautiful Mind really highlighted a new way that he was going. And Iris especially. It was more gentle, I think, even more emotional. There was less action, and I think when we did have action, it was a bit more sparse.
Horner's respect for the material on screen produced one of the most intimate and lyrical scores of his career. In 2002, acclaimed action film director John Woo produced and directed the harrowing war film Wind Talkers, starring Nicolas Cage and Adam Beach. Two US Marines in World War II are assigned to protect Navajo Marines who use their native language as an unbreakable radio cipher. Post-production was, like The Perfect Storm, not kind to Horner's music. Woo rearranged the score so that very few of the cues are in the correct location. Horner's use of ethnic instrumentation had been declining in recent years. Wind Talkers offered a chance to reassert these characteristics. Also in 2002, Horner worked on a remake of the classic tale The Four Feathers, directed by Shashka Kapoor, and starring Wes Bentley, Heath Ledger and Kate Hudson. This would be the composer's first collaboration with the vocalist Rashat Nasrat Fateh Ali Khan, someone who Horner would use later on a number of occasions. Horner then returned to director Martin Campbell for Beyond Borders in 2003. The film follows the problematic romance between a busy American socialite, played by Angelina Jolie, and a rogue doctor, played by Clive Owen. James Horner's score, utilising electronic and orchestral elements, samples freely from the music of the represented countries, Ethiopia, Cambodia and Chechnya, preferring not to focus on the romance between the two leads, but instead on the people in those war-torn areas. The result is a character-driven and well-defined work, and is one of Horner's most original of his career. The Missing was a western based on Thomas Edison's 1996 novel The Last Ride, and starred Tommy Lee Jones, Cate Blanchett, Evan Rachel Wood and Val Kilmer. With a plot with similarities to the classic western The Searchers, Ron Howard's film is set in 1885 New Mexico territory. A father returns home, hoping to reconcile with his adult daughter, but when his granddaughter is kidnapped, the father and his estranged daughter must work together to get her back. Erik Woods.
The Missing was Horner's first Western since American Tail, 50 Goes West, and it couldn't be any more different than that score. Out is the Copland-esque Americana traditional writing, and in comes an extension of scores like Thunderheart, Wind Talkers, Legends of the Fall. There's some Braveheart in there as well. It's scored basically for lush sweeping orchestra, which is peppered with percussion, airy synthesizers, ethnic flutes, and voices which speak to the Native American themes and characters in the score. It's a very moody, dark, bleak score, something that might be found in a more modern-day thriller score, but it fits perfectly in the cold, unforgiving winter months of 1885 New Mexico.
The Missing would be James Horner's final film with director Ron Howard. Horner would later state that the film was fundamentally flawed and no matter what he did, could not have saved the movie. The composer's final assignment for 2003 would be House of Sand and Fog. This would be the first of 2 films scored by Horner for director Vadim Perlman. The story concerns the battle between a young woman, Jennifer Connelly, and the family of an exiled Iranian colonel from the Shah's elite circle over the ownership of a house in Northern California, which ultimately leads to the tragic destruction of 4 lives. The film was nominated for 3 Academy Awards: Best Actor for Sir Ben Kingsley, Best Supporting Actress for Shohreh Aghdashloo, who played Kingsley's wife, and the 7th Best Original Score nomination for James Horner. Troy was one of James Horner's most controversial film assignments of his entire career. Wolfgang Petersen's expensive 3-hour Trojan War epic starred Brad Pitt and Erik Bana. In early 2003, Petersen hired Gabriel Yared to write the score, who started researching even before shooting began. Yared spent over a year writing and recorded his music at Abbey Road with a 100-piece orchestra with added 25-piece brass section, a Bulgarian chorus to produce authentic Eastern European vocals, and solo vocalist Tanja Zavoska. Yared succeeded, in his opinion, in producing his finest score. Petersen and the film producers were also enthusiastic about Yared's work, and the director persuaded Yared to allow him to use the unfinished mixes for preview screenings to replace the temp. After a test screening in Sacramento, California, in the space of 24 hours, everything changed. The focus group at the preview screening described the score as being overpowering, too big, and old-fashioned. The studio went into panic, and Petersen immediately sought help from other composers even before officially removing Yared from the project, without giving the composer any time for rewrites. Peterson first called John Debney, who turned him down flat. It was now that Peterson turned to James Horner. Horner accepted the challenge of scoring Troy in just 10 days after viewing a test screening with Jared's now rejected score, describing it as a 1950s Hercules movie. It was so corny, it was unbelievable. Composer James Semple.
So with Troy, I think the thing that got me was that obviously one of the controversial parts of this score was the fact that Gabriel Yared had spent about a year working on his score, and Wolfgang Petersen, I believe, had kind of told him it was a big Wagnerian operatic affair. And I think the controversy occurred around the fact that A, his score was rejected, and B, some of the comments made by James Horner around the score, because obviously he was brought in, again, at incredibly short notice. But the two things that you really notice about this, to my mind, is one, it just works absolutely perfectly, the picture. Again, Horner's enormous experience and just gift for scoring drama. And, I mean, the comments he said weren't, I would say, unkind. He was perhaps just a little bit more candid than we're used to from Hollywood. I believe the phrase he's used was that he'd never heard music mentioned in test screenings before. And yet, in the test screenings of the original version of the film, the music was wildly decried, which is quite a shock, really. And I think it's important to recognise that the music can be fantastic and just not work either to picture or perhaps to context, which I think maybe Gabriel Yared had kind of sort of taken Wolfgang Petersen at his word when he said he was writing a Wagnerian opera and sort of gone ahead and written it.
Erik Woods.
It's when I think directors or producers are thinking commercially what's going to resonate best with 18 to 30-year-olds or whatever the demographic is, and how they can sell more records or sell more movie tickets. It's a business, I get it, but I just wish that creativity wasn't being sacrificed for the big bucks. And I honestly don't think that you reject score A because it sounds kind of old-fashioned in Hollywood, and then you bring somebody else in, it sounds more modern, is really going to sell more tickets or more records, honestly. Gabriel Yared produced a golden age giant symphonic score. Well, you listen to Horner's score, which, I mean, it's not that bad for 12 days work or whatever it was, but it's still the same style. What in the world were they thinking? Why was it the name? Nobody's heard of Gabriel Yared, but people have heard of James Horner. Can we sell a few more records? Can we sell a few more tickets? Does anybody care about the names? I don't know why, because it doesn't make any sense. I mean, I could just tell if you went from Yared to Harry Gregson Williams or Trevor Rabin. Right? There's a big difference in musical style. But you went from one symphonic composer to another symphonic composer. I just don't get that rejection. It's so strange. But to call it old-fashioned and old-fashioned Hollywood, and that's what kind of irks me.
composer Scott Glasgow.
If you listen to Troy, you're going to hear this main fanfare, this da-da-da-da-da-da thing. And I was thinking, wow, that is really cool that he came up with that. However, one day I was listening to Benjamin Britten's War Requiem. And guess what I heard? That exact excerpt. So, again, I don't have as much problems as the critics do of this use of classical music. To me, it's a win-win. It's not in any way a negative thing. It challenges the composer to harmonically step up. Those are masters, and you've got to somehow bring your A game to do something 70% as good. And again, I'm not distracted by the 1 minute he used in Troy that was from Benjamin Britten, because there was 90 minutes or some other, I don't know how many total minutes was in Troy, but it doesn't distract from the fact of all the other coolness that happened between that 1 minute that he borrowed.
From CKWR Radio's Visions in Sound, Robert Daniels.
It's a shame that Gabriel Yared's score to the film was rejected because it sounded really, really good. It's kind of Horner putting on his standard setup for music. It's using all his tricks, all his shortcuts to get a score out. Now the song, Remember, which is written by James Horner and performed by Josh Groban, is a very good song. Like, it's an amazing song. So he must have had this song rattling around in his mind for quite some time. I don't really know, but it's quite a fascinating listen.
Remember, I will still be long as you hold me in your memory. Remember me. I am that warm voice in the cold wind that whispers, and if you listen, you'll hear me call across the sky. Long as I still can reach out and touch you, that I will never die.
In 2005, Horner scored Flight Plan, a mystery thriller directed by Robert Schuetche, starring Jodie Foster, Peter Sarsgaard, Greta Scacchi and Sean Bean. Foster is a widowed American aircraft engineer who finds her 6-year-old daughter missing on a flight from Germany to the US and panics when none of the other passengers can remember her. When stewards tell her that her daughter is not on the manifest, airplane staff begin to think she is delusional. In an interview, Horner stated that the film's score tried to mix the sound effects with the emotion and drive of the music, and the instruments were picked to match the feelings of panic that goes on through the film. These included gamelan instruments, prepared piano and string arrangements, and excluding all brass. Conrad Pope was one of the orchestrators on Flight Plan.
When you go out to James's studio, where he lived, you'd walk and it would be like showing up at either a mad scientist's laboratory or Santa Claus or something from Blade Runner, because he had these toys. He was a toy fanatic. And someone that was much closer to him than I am or was, Joey Rand. And Joey and I have been very close. He's a music editor and I was an orchestrator. And Joey and I knew each other as composers, which was a few years earlier. But Joey just said, what you don't know about James is that he had so many different passions. Like he was even a spelunker, going down in caves. He sought that out, which probably made him an ideal choice for 33. I mean, my God. But he was a man of curiosities that he kept to himself. But when you go into his studio, once I remember seeing this almost robot thing walking around that he had built. It was like Blade Runner. And then he was obsessed with time. So the place was covered with clocks. And the one that was the most interesting to me was this holographic clock that projected the time in midair and was connected to the Naval Observatory in Colorado that has the atomic clock, the U.S. Naval Observatory in Colorado that sort of sets the time for the U.S. Navy. And so you would have that official time on the atomic clock from the U.S. Navy projected holographically by this man that didn't really use computers at all.
The Legend of Zorro, Martin Campbell's sequel to the 1998's Mask of Zorro, reunited Antonio Banderas and Catherine Zeta-Jones, as Zorro faces his greatest challenge as he tries to save his wife from a criminal mastermind, played by Rufus Sewell, who was behind a terrorist plot threatening California's impending statehood. Horner brews up a world of fun in his score, reprising the themes from the first film and creating a Latino frenzy in his action writing, of which the 11-minute cue The Train is a highlight. Horner's final score of 2005 would test his skill and his wits to their limit. The New World was director Terrence Malick's fourth feature film. It depicted the founding of Jamestown, Virginia settlement in 1607 and was inspired by the historical figures Captain John Smith, Pocahontas and John Rolfe. The cast includes Colin Farrell, Oranka Kilcher, Christopher Plummer, Christian Bale, Wes Studi and David Thewlis. Scoring the film would present James Horner himself with a challenging journey which would eventually end in utter frustration. Erik Woods.
The New World was arguably one of the worst experiences of James Horner's career, and he had his fair share of bad experiences. Just go back and read about everything he had to go through on Aliens. Now, for The New World, director Terrence Malick was basically tweaking, cutting, and arranging his film for what seemed like an eternity, according to Horner. Malick was consistently missing deadlines, and Horner was getting really nervous, having not seen any of the movie, with recording dates looming. Horner eventually finished his score to the best of his abilities, with oddly arranged and cut scenes provided to him by his music editors. Even then, Horner got the sense that Malick had no clue on how to use his music in the picture. Horner is a man used to conventional filmmaking, and that sort of approach didn't stand a chance with a man like Terrence Malick, who doesn't make conventional films. It was a clash of styles, and eventually most of Horner's score was replaced by needle drop music by Wagner, Mozart, Vivaldi, and other classical composers. So basically what we're left with is a rejected score inspired by the images Horner saw of whatever version of the film he had access to. Horner's score at its core triggers the emotional love story of the picture between John Smith and Pocahontas. The score it's light, it's feathery, it's delicate, and really intricate and intimate. One interesting aspect of the score is Horner's use of sound effects in a few of the cues. Horner once created the lush sounds of the rainforest in the 1988 film Vibes by using synthesizers, percussion, and orchestra to mimic those sounds. However, in the New World, especially during the opening cue, he utilizes actual sound effects of birds and other sounds of Mother Nature as part of the musical textures, which includes twinkling piano, voices, synthesizers, and traditional orchestra, which surprisingly blends together so effortlessly and naturally. It's really one of the most stunning cues you'll hear from the mind of James Horner. So I really do enjoy The New World quite a bit, even though, again, Horner didn't have much to inspire him, but he did write an inspired score.
Horner and Glenn Ballard wrote and recorded the song Listen to the Wind, sung by Haley Westerner, for the closing credits, but this too was unused, but appears at the end of the soundtrack album. All the King's Men is a 2006 film adaptation of the 1946 Pulitzer Prize novel by Robert Penn Warren. This was Horner's second score for writer-director Stephen Zalian after working on Searching for Bobby Fischer. Zalian also produced and scripted the film. The story is about the life of Willie Stark, played by Sean Penn, a fictional character resembling real-life Louisiana Governor Huey Long, in office from 1928 to 1932. He was elected as a US Senator and was assassinated in 1935. The film co-stars Jude Law, Kate Winslet, Sir Anthony Hopkins, James Gandolfini, Mark Ruffalo, Patricia Clarkson and Jackie Earle Haley. When first speaking to Horner, the director Zalian asked for a score that was operatic yet intimate, traditional yet modern, with bold, memorable themes tinged with sweeping darkness and knowing slyness. Horner did his best to follow Zalian's instructions, but what he could not envisage was the film's post-production problems, causing Horner's recording sessions to be delayed a year. Despite these problems, the director described Horner's work as the finest film score I have ever heard. APOCALYPTO, also in 2006, was director Mel Gibson's follow-up to his controversial film The Passion of the Christ. The film divided critics and filmgoers alike with its authentic and at times very gory depiction of the story of a Mesoamerican tribesman escaping human sacrifice and rescuing his family after the capture and destruction of his village at the time when the Mayan civilization was coming to an end. The film, like Passion, with authentic sounding dialogue, was a box office success, grossing over $120 million worldwide. APOCALYPTO was the third collaboration by Horner with Mel Gibson, after Man Without a Face and most memorably Braveheart. Deliberately staying away from the orchestra, Horner utilised an array of exotic instruments to produce an authentic sound to the film's environment in addition to synthesizers, a soundscape that echoes some of Horner's earlier works. Robert Daniels.
APOCALYPTO, probably one of Horner's more unusual scores in the fact that it's a very percussion-driven score. I'd liken it to Thunderheart in that kind of approach, but there's also like this very kind of sound, and then paw every once in a while comes through. It's a very unusual score for Horner. It has this kind of almost ethereal quality to it. Almost like it's like a dream state kind of score. The approach to the beginning of the score is very similar to The New World in the fact that it features nature sounds, and it's a very interesting approach. It's not one that I'm completely convinced on, something that I could probably get behind kind of, but it's an interesting approach, especially to this one. The rest of the score is kind of, again, very percussion-based, very vocal-based. It's not like anything I'd ever heard from him before. It's interesting to note that in this case, I honestly think that this is probably what people were expecting from Avatar, and what they got was something a little bit more standard. But this here is completely off the mark when it comes to Horner's approach. I mean, yes, there are the little Hornerisms in there, but not to the extent of even Thunderheart. And it's not one that you can just kind of sit and listen to. It's one that you kind of have to, very much like The Dig, a video game score that came out in 1996. Very ethereal, very unlike anything he has done before or since. And it's just a fantastic score that challenges the listener to pick up where he's trying to go. And again, that whole kind of approach is very interesting and very unlike Horner when it comes to that kind of score.
Scott Glasgow.
The thing about Apocalypto that, for me, that stood out was Nusrat Fat Ali Khan. Tremendous use of vocals that are not exactly in Western tuning, if that makes any sense. It just, the way the vocals bend, the way that he sets up these percussion beds, these jungle sounds, but then adds this breathy voice, really stood out for me. Really stood out.
Director Gibson describes Khan's contribution to the score as this: "He is a valuable asset to our soundtrack. His dulcet tones and emotion and drama. We don't have an orchestra, so he's fulfilling a lot of the functions that would usually be supplied by the use of a full orchestra. Just all in one man. He's a one-man band." Horner scored just one film in 2007, The Land Before Her Eyes, his second and final collaboration with director Vadim Perlman, before starting in 2008 with a return to a genre of which the composer had excelled in the past, children's fantasy. The Spiderwick Chronicles, Mark Walters' adaptation of Holly Black's book, tells the story of two youngsters who discover a magical world of fairies, battle goblins and mole trolls. The film starred Freddie Highmore, Sarah Bolger, Mary Louise Parker, Martin Short, Nick Nolte and Seth Rogen. This score would be the last Horner recorded at the Todd AO stage in Los Angeles. One thing you could always rely on from a James Horner score was a recording of the highest possible quality. But what was the evolution of the Horner sound? Chris Malone.
If you look at Horner's body of work, there is various epochs in that. And what I mean by that is there's various stages or groups of time in that he not only changed himself in terms of the style that he was writing, but he also changed his recording engineer. So there's some overlap between the engineers, but there's also different styles of recording that come into play. Let's move beyond those low-budget Roger Corman things and get straight into the big studio pictures like Wolfen and then Star Trek II and 48 Hours. They were all recorded by Dan Wallen. It was one of actually using a lot of sectional boothing of the orchestra, one of applying a lot of microphones to those sections. And rather than having a series of overheads, it was just using a stereo pair typically above the conductor's podium, but using those sectional mics and those tight miking of those sections to come up with the overall sound. Then using some reverb or echo to kind of push that back further and give some distance and some space in the sound. Now, one thing that Dan Wallen is absolutely a genius in is capturing the sound of woodwinds. I don't really think that there's somebody else that comes up with a really phase-coherent, brilliant woodwind sound than Dan Wallen. When you hear these early scores, you'll be able to always pick out the woodwinds with a lot of clarity and cut through. So then there's this little crossover piece that occurred, which was in 1983, in September of that year. James Horner travelled to London to record the Brainstorm album. He'd already done the soundtrack in Los Angeles and actually done that with Sean Murphy. And it was moving to London to record with Erik Tomlinson and the London Symphony Orchestra. And that was a live to 2-track digital album, and certainly one that has this breathtaking dynamic range, great clarity, wonderful layering of depth, giving this really 3D effect of the orchestra. So you're hearing the left and the right, but you're also hearing depth. And I think that was one of these turning points for Horner, because it gave him this view that an orchestra could sound a bit different to what was presented by Dan Wallen. Insofar that Dan Wallen, his recording technique was fantastic, but you didn't really get a lot of depth a lot of the time that was a natural depth, whereas Erik Tomlinson would often give us this natural depth and this real sound of the acoustic space. And then it was Sean Murphy who entered the scene. Now, Sean Murphy in the early 80s had really brought into Hollywood the concept of using the Decca tree. Now, the Decca tree being a concept that employed 3 microphones that were on a T-piece that was high above the conductor, so 10 feet above or more, and it had 3 microphones that were omnidirectional microphones. One was pointed directly inwards of the orchestra to pick up the woodwinds, and that was the closest to the orchestra. The left and right ones picking up the strings, high strings on the left, the low strings on the right, and then the rest of the orchestra as well. This technique was often used to really give the orchestra a sense of space and place, and it was very highly used in the classical recording space. So Kenneth Wilkinson and some of the Decca team in the early 1950s came up with this technique, and it was something that really Sean Murphy was the guy that brought the Decca tree to Hollywood. And his reason for doing that was to give the orchestra, again, a sense of space and size and scale. And it was something that Erik Tomlinson achieved without using the Decca tree at all, but in the case of Sean Murphy, he used this technique. And again, I think Horner fell in love with this idea that the orchestra could have this close sound through some spot miking, but also this rich, wide, expansive tone, courtesy of the Decca tree. It was then after that point, sometime after Titanic, Horner switched gears again and he moved into working with Simon Rhodes. Now, Simon Rhodes, I think, took that technique that Sean Murphy had employed with the Decca tree, but sort of pushed all of the microphones a little bit further back and allowed more of the room to be captured rather than relying on artificial reverb to give a kind of a fill-in sound. He was really enjoying the concept of hearing the room in which the orchestra was performing. So if you look at all these stages through Horner's career and the engineers that were involved, really the pattern that I've seen at least is this one of pushing microphones further and further away from the instruments to give you more and more of the room sound where the instruments were performing rather than just the instruments by themselves.
Avatar, released in December 2009, took a year of James Horner's life to work on. Written, directed, produced and co-edited by James Cameron, Avatar starred Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana, Stephen Lang, Michelle Rodriguez and Sigourney Weaver. The film is set in the mid-22nd century when humans are colonising Pandora, a lush, habitable moon of a gas giant in the Alpha Centauri star system, in order to mine the mineral unobtainium. The expansion of the mining colony threatens the continued existence of the local tribe of Na'vi, a humanoid species indigenous to Pandora. The film's title refers to a genetically engineered Na'vi body with the mind of a remotely located human that is used to interact with the natives of Pandora. Horner started work on Avatar immediately after finishing The Boy with the Striped Pyjamas, working almost 24 hours a day, perfecting each cue for James Cameron's epic. He immediately realised that this project would eclipse everything he had worked on to date, even Titanic. He insisted that the score should have a traditional orchestral base, and also was able to use all the ethnic, organic, synthetic elements of all his scores to date in one big collaborative mix. Film music journalist Jeff Bond.
It reminded me of kind of science fiction paperbacks that I'd grown up reading as a teenager and never dreamed would actually see put on film. But its accomplishment is really amazing. And Horner did tremendous work in that film. The film is about a guy who kind of slowly integrates himself into a tribe of aliens on another planet. And Horner wrote a really beautiful theme that I realized, I think the second time I watched the picture, is very carefully planted until it kind of flowers at this moment when this guy is accepted into this tribe and becomes part of that. And then it becomes this anthem later in the film when he's basically fighting against his own people on behalf of these natives of another world. And Horner wrote a love theme for that, which is clearly an attempt to kind of get into the same areas as Titanic. He was smart in knowing that the way to appeal to the whole audience and not just the male sci-fi nerds who are going to go see the movie was to concentrate on that love relationship and make that convincing. And so Avatar really did appeal to a huge worldwide mass audience because it hit on some very universal, time-honored, some would say cliched themes.
Scott Glasgow.
Avatar is just such a huge monumental piece. And again, Avatar has homage to Stravinsky for sure. There's one of the last scenes when they have a fight, and it's just so rhythmically Stravinsky Rite of Spring. It completely works. In this case, he didn't borrow and quote Stravinsky. He kind of put on the Stravinsky jacket and just kind of got that rhythm and the aggression. It's great stuff, man. Avatar's got just ass-kicking, virtuosic use of the orchestra. Horner firing on all cylinders, just kicking ass.
James Semple.
Big score. Again, in the sort of same as Titanic, had a huge worldwide hit attached to it with I See You, which I think was an advert for a kind of instant messenger. And then, from my point of view, it was good because he was heading back in the direction of the big fantasy sci-fi scores, which obviously was kind of exciting, but only really on the surface. Nature of the score, obviously a lot more synths in the score than you'd have heard in those. He's much more block chord style of writing, like I said, simplifying and writing in a more streamlined manner, as he called it. Less of the ornate big orchestra fiddliness and you know, the kind of depth and complexity in the arrangements that he would have traditionally had. And again, continuing with his more modern style of harmonies that he'd introduced with A Beautiful Mind. But obviously a huge bombastic score. Great to hear him writing big themes. Great to hear these great big battle sequences with full orchestra really playing. And again, some additional music, interestingly, on that film from Nicholas Dodd. So Nicholas was helping out on that film. I'm not sure entirely what he can say about it, but yeah, I know he wrote additional music on it. So.
A remake of the 1984 box office hit The Karate Kid, scored in 2010, was a starring vehicle for Will Smith's son Jaden, with Jackie Chan in the role of the instructor of a boy in kung fu, not karate, in defeating a clan of bullies when moving from Detroit to Beijing. Icelandic composer Atli Orvarsson was originally hired to score the film, but he was replaced by Horner. Horner's involvement in the project came as a surprise to the film music community, as this was now a rare entry for Horner into mainstream film scoring. And, once the remake was announced, there were arguments that Bill Conti, composer of the original 4 Karate Kid films, would return to score the film. Directed by Jean-Jacques Conrad, Black Gold, or Day of the Vulcan as its alternative title, was a story of the discovery of oil in the early 20th century Arabia and the battle to control it between 2 powerful families. It had the distinction of being the first Arab-funded major feature film about the region in the history of cinema. James Horner.
I'm attracted by people that allow me to bring something different than what the movie audience would normally expect. And Jean-Jacques and Ron, in fact, most of the directors I work for, all know that I'm going to try and find some weird combination of colors, be they Western colors or exotic colors or Mideastern colors in the case of this movie. And I try and fuse them. I don't like to just stick with the normal color palette. I'm always trying to find things that narrate things in a more mystical, in a more magical way. And Jean-Jacques is just one of those guys that allows me to do that. It was not successful for 2 primary reasons. It was made with a lot of Mideast money. It was a French film. which is always sort of exotic to me as opposed to a Hollywood movie. So I'm always trying to work with European directors. And it was a bit of a gamble. It was obviously a story about oil, doubtful how well it would do in the United States. And the Mideastern money sort of, during post-production, they went out of business, quite honestly. And there was no money to do marketing. The whole film was finished and had previewed really, really well. And there was no money for marketing. And there was just no way to distribute it. And the Americans certainly weren't going to buy it. So it was really left stranded. And I felt so dreadful for Jean-Jacques. He worked for 1.5 years on this movie.
For Greater Glory was the directorial debut for Dean Wright, with a story based on the events of a popular uprising in Mexico in the 1920s, where Christians fought to preserve their faith. The film starred Andy Garcia, Eva Longoria, Oscar Isaacs, Ruben Blades, Peter O'Toole and Bruce Greenwood. Like with Black Gold, Horner again seized on the opportunity for scoring obscure docudrama. The music was recorded with a session orchestra, Abbey Road, London, enhanced with 3 guitars, ethnic woodwind, electric cello, Paraguayan harp, vocal soloists and the London Voices. The critic Stephen Holden of the New York Times described Horner's music as uplifting without being syrupy, which set an inspirational mood. The Amazing Spider-Man would be Horner's first foray into the superhero genre since The Rocketeer in 1991. The film starred Andrew Garfield in the title role and was directed by Mark Webb. Adam Cousins.
Spider-Man was, I think, a real return to the sort of form that I've been looking for, because there was more action in there, and it was also, again, very emotional in places. And he was also, I think, embracing a new style of scoring in terms of he was combining traditional orchestral scoring with a combination of electronics that seemed to work really well for him.
James Semple.
So with Spider-Man, what I thought he did a brilliant job was putting in a lot of his trademark styles, and some of even his kind of more early trademark dissonances and things that he would typically do, where he'd add this note over this kind of chord in the theme. Even though the theme is a much simpler theme than some of his traditional long melodies, it's really more of a motif, the main Spider-Man theme, that kind of heroic ba 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 ba. And it's not used that often in the film either, which again is a more of a contemporary thing. There's less of this kind of just playing that beautiful, giving that room for the big theme to stretch out in it. But I actually was really impressed with it. It was nice that he was doing some fairly traditional stuff with the action cues. You can hear pianos slamming and that kind of stuff in there, which is great. But a lot of the score felt like he was being forced to write in a style that wasn't really him. And you hear that in some of his contemporary stuff. There's a lot of drum loops and sort of tempo synthesizers pulsing and stuff like that. But when he's given the chance to do the melodic stuff in there, it's absolutely fantastic.
Scott Glasgow.
Amazing Spider-Man was one of my favorite scores that he did. I know that he was not really all flippy about that film and doing it, but man, it has some really great moments. And I remember seeing that film and just thinking to myself, yeah, this is great. This is great scoring. And having worked on Spider-Man 2 myself, not Amazing Spider-Man, but the earlier one, and having all this Spider-Man music that had happened after that, I just think he just nailed it. He combined live orchestra, synths. He had brought in some of his earlier themes, or I should say motives, and it just worked for me on all levels. It just worked. Totally captured all that stuff that I wanted for me with that film.
Webb had asked Horner to create a score that felt massive and huge, but also intimate and small. The composer was up to the task, composing music that stands up well against other past and present superhero film scores. In November 2012, Horner scored the short film First in Flight, written and directed by Brandon Hess as part of his film thesis at the American Film Institute. The film focuses on May the 30th, 1912, and two bicycle mechanics, Orville and Wilbur Wright, who in their lifetime dared to believe they can fly. As Orville spends the final hours beside his brother's deathbed, they reflect on their lives, the joys, the pains, the successes and failures, and wonder, was it all worth it? After First in Flight, Horner began what would become a 3-year hiatus from film scoring. How deliberate the length of this break was is unclear. It could be that Horner's melodic style of music was becoming out of fashion in Hollywood. Scott, Glasgow.
You have to again ask yourself, why was that? Why did Horner not work as much? Well, I know his agent, and I heard he was very eager to do a lot of these things, but there's a lot of reasons for this. One, the first-time directors, which is a big part of Hollywood, is these guys who get that chance to do their thing, are young. They're 20, 25. And do they want to work with a guy who's 65? There's a communication issue right there. Horner really wanted to get into superheroes, and he did. He got his chance with Spider-Man, and then he didn't want to do it. Well, he did a great job, and he got into it later, but at the beginning he was kind of like, I'm not sure he wanted to do it, after asking to do it for a long time. So you have to just look at what's going on.
On receiving the Max Steiner Film Music Achievement Award at the 2013 Hollywood in Vienna Gala for exceptional achievements in the art of film music, Horner made his views clear on modern film music. A lot of directors don't want melodic writing anymore, which is fine, but a lot of the scores that are being made now tend to, in a sense, very much sound the same, a big wall of sound. This break in film scoring now turned the 59-year-old James Horner towards composing again for the concert hall, the first time since Spectral Shimmers in 1978. In November 2014, Horner premiered his first piece for the concert hall in 36 years. Pas de Deux, a concerto for violin, cello and orchestra, was commissioned by Murray and Hakon Samuelsson. It was performed for the first time by the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Vasily Potenko, to mark the orchestra's 175th season. Adam Cousins.
I felt that James Horner had rediscovered his mojo, should we say, for want of a better phrase. The music was just so beautiful. It's that emotion that he hits, it's that chord that he hits in you. I also thought it was good that it touched again on his earlier creations, most notably Star Trek towards the end, because that ending, just every time I can listen to that and I could stand on the table and just go, yes, that is just brilliant. And no other music can do that for me. And that's the honest truth. And even talking about it now, it really gets to me, but in a good way, I have to say. And I'm thankful for that.
Not long after Horner completed Pas de Deux, he was back on the scoring stage working for an old friend. Wolf Totem turned out to be Horner's last score for French director Jean-Jacques Annaud, based on a 2004 Chinese semi-autobiographical novel written by Zhang Huang. In 1969, a student is sent to the Chinese region of Inner Mongolia to teach shepherds. Instead, he learns about the shepherds and their bond with the wolves, a bond that is threatened by a government seeking to eradicate the animals. After a long absence from the scoring stage, James Horner took the chance to convey scope and grandeur in his music for large orchestra recorded at Air Studios London. It is a score of orchestral power, all now too rarely heard in the years succeeding it. Jeff Bond.
Honestly, until I worked on Braveheart, I think I had really stopped paying a lot of attention to James Horner. For one thing, film music in general has gotten less interesting to me, and there are not as many composers that I run out and buy every score that they put out on an album anymore. So I wasn't paying attention to the landscape of film scoring in general as much, but I definitely had not bought or listened to a James Horner score in a few years. And I heard this piece from Wolf Totem, and it's as exciting and interesting and dramatic and powerful as anything that I'd heard from him or from any other composer, certainly working in the last 10 years. And it really made me stand up and take notice and think that this guy has years of great scores left in him.
Erik Woods.
What really is one of the saddest things for me concerning James Horner, and then looking at his output from the year that he passed away, I felt like he really wasn't getting back into it. He had Amazing Spider-Man, he had Black Gold, but then when I heard Wolf Totem, and then just the sheer amount of work that he was doing in 2015, I thought that this was a resurgence of his career. I thought he was coming back. I thought he was finally inspired enough and able to pick the projects that he wanted to work on that fulfilled him. And I could feel that in his music. And it was just so tragically taken away from us.
In the score's CD album notes, director Jean-Jacques Arnaud said this of his musical collaborator: "James is for me an exceptionally creative companion. Together, we talk about the meaning of the film and we agree immediately, sometimes even in the 24th of a second. I entirely trust him. Working alongside him is a unique experience." The following month, March 2015, another new Horner piece for the concert hall was premiered. Collage, a concerto for French horns and orchestra, was commissioned by the Houston Symphony and the International Horn Society and was first performed at the Royal Festival Hall London by the London Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Jamie Martin with soloists James Thatcher, David Fryatt, John Ryan and Richard Watkins. On a trailer for the project, Horner said this about Collage: You have a core group of 4 French horns, but you also have these different ensembles in the orchestra that I've woven together in something like a tapestry, but I suppose I could have called it a tapestry, but I felt it more of a collage of different colours, so really I was just doing it out of my head, like a painting. For me, the French horn is the most romantic of the brass instruments, and what you can do with it ranges from heroic to the most serene. Jeff Bond.
He was doing concert compositions, which he had done, I think, since he was a student. Bob Townsend at Varese Sarabande told me something amazing, that Horner had never heard his music performed in concert, and that he apparently was always afraid of how it would be presented and was just too nervous about it, and that he finally went on tour, heard some of his music performed in Scotland. And this is a guy who's written some of the most popular film music, some of the music that has connected most with audiences, who's probably ever lived when you're talking about a film composer. This guy never got to see the impact of his music on an audience, on a concert audience. That is just stunning.
Scott, Glasgow.
I studied with John Corigliano, so I understand, and I went to a conservatory and I studied a lot of classical music. And there are certain things that film music has to answer, and there's certain things that classical music has to answer. And I mean that in the most general way. Go into a concert hall, you sit down, the musical story unfolds, whatever that is. And Horner, I guess, took that musical story to a nth degree that it feels more like film music transplanted than it does feel like concert music, like something you get from John Corigliano or John Adams, for that matter. I like them as pieces of music, but I'm not entirely certain they fit the concert world and what that expectation is. A great comparison would be John Williams. When John Williams writes a concert work, it is a concert work. It doesn't really resemble film music. Elliot Goldenthal's the similar one. Elliot Goldenthal's concert works are a different animal than the film work. James Horner, with collage and how to do, they just felt like transplanted film music in many ways. It just didn't have the same developmental process that I kind of am expecting. And I'm all for getting something I'm not expecting. I'm all for being surprised or something like that. But this wasn't that. I wasn't surprised.
The following month saw the release of Living in the Age of Airplanes. Produced and directed by Brian J. Terwilliger for the National Geographic, the documentary was 6 years in the making and filmed over 18 countries and 7 continents. Narrated by Harrison Ford, It tells the story of how a technology has made humanity much closer and able to move vast distances in a matter of hours, whereas before it would take a lifetime. The film's premiere took place on board, appropriately, an Emirates A380 aeroplane. On May 3rd, 2015, James Horner was at the Royal Albert Hall, London, to attend a Titanic Live, a performance of the composer's Academy Award-winning score performed live to picture by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, the Tiffin Boys Choir with the soloist Sissel and Erik Rigler, all conducted by Ludwig Wicki. The standing ovation at the end of the performance was staggering, lasting several minutes. On stage to receive the applause was conductor Wicki, director James Cameron, producer John Landau and James Horner. Film music fan Adam Cousins actually met James Horner at the performance.
The impression I got, having sort of seen him speak live, is that he's very humble but also very appreciative of all the attention that he had in the end. And I don't mean in the end because he didn't know it was the end. He just seemed very happy to sort of spend time with people that wanted to speak to him about his music. And I have to say, and my favourite bit of that evening where I did meet him, I sort of spoke to him and he signed a couple of CDs for me, which was fantastic. But I was on an aisle seat, and as he walked down, I put my hand up to do a high five, and he high-fived me, and it was like, yes, get in. There we are. And had we not been able to sort of meet him after, because we didn't know at that point, that was still my evening made, and all was great in the world at that point. To me, he just seemed humble, I think very realistic in terms of how the industry worked. He had quite a few things to say about that. But I just thought he was strong-willed. He knew what he wanted to do and that he had the ability to do it, and that he didn't have to bow down to producers asking him to do things that he didn't want. It was as simple as that. I think a lot of people resented the fact that he was so successful when there was so much talk about his use and borrowing of classical music, adapting it, reusing his own stuff. But to me, he just knew exactly what to use with the film in question. It's like a comedian, a stand-up comedian. We use the same jokes with different subject matter, that sort of thing. They get away with it, and it wasn't a case of him getting away with it. He was doing what was best for his craft. And then when it came to writing the concert hall pieces, not classical pieces, because apparently we're not allowed to say that according to Christopher Gunning, they should be concert hall pieces. That was him properly expressing himself, I think, without any constraints.
A few days before, on the 29th of April, James Horner was interviewed by film music journalist Tommy Pearson for the BAFTA Guru series of podcasts. You have heard extracts from this interview throughout the series. At the end of the interview, Horner sounded very enthusiastic over future projects.
I'm supposed to do 2 films. Funnily enough, I'm supposed to do, which is hugely important to me historically, I want to do Mel's next movie. He's going to direct a film, and it's hugely important for him. He's so brilliant, and I want to be there at that moment in film history, because I think Hollywood is so shallow and what's been done to him is so dreadful, and as a filmmaker he's so brilliant, and it'll only take one film. I just know how this stuff works. All he has to do is make one film and he'll be re-embraced, whether it's about the Medicis, which he would do brilliantly, he has a script for, or whatever, and that's what I'm working on next.
This would be James Horner's last ever recorded interview. On Monday, June the 22nd, 2015, at 9:30am local time, an S-312 Tucano turboprop aircraft crashed in Los Padres National Forest near Vancouver, California. The only person aboard the aircraft was killed. The following day, Horner's attorney confirmed that it was James Horner at the controls of the aeroplane when it took off after fueling at Camarillo Airport. The Ventura County Medical Examiner's Office on June the 25th confirmed Horner's death and ruled the crash was an accident. He is survived by his wife Sarah and their 2 daughters. James Horner was 61 years old. As news of the composer's death broke, social media sites exploded like never before for a film composer, with tributes from friends, colleagues and fans. Nick Redman.
I was out at my home in Rancho Mirage, out in the desert, when I got the news, got a text saying that he'd been killed in a plane crash, and I was really sad about it. I had completely lost touch with him. And even when we were restoring his scores for various things, I mean, he was sent them as a courtesy to approve, but there was no real personal contact. And yet when I got that text telling me that he had been shockingly killed like that, just completely out of the blue, it was a very sad moment.
Film director Ron Howard wrote, "The loss of James Horner is a profound one for all who loved his music and the movies he elevated so brilliantly through his work. Those of us who had the opportunity to work with and befriend James will miss his wit, his intelligence, his fascination with the world and his remarkable talent and taste." Erik Woods.
I was at home, I was in my basement and browsing film music message boards like I do, and someone had mentioned that a plane that was owned by James Horner had crashed somewhere in the desert. And I'm like, okay, that's like, I don't think James Horner could be in it. But then again, if it's a plane that's owned by James Horner, who else is going to be flying this? So I kept up with the news. I kept on checking. I kept on, looking on Facebook and looking on Twitter. And then I think, I'm not sure whether it was his agent, not his agent, somebody who was close to Horner mentioned on a Facebook post that she had lost somebody. It was really tragic. And then, of course, you're putting 2 and 2 together. And people are always looking for confirmation, I think, throughout the day. And I'm not sure how long it took for the confirmation to come out. But that at that moment, I knew Horner was gone.
James Cameron wrote, "James was a close friend and an inspiring collaborator. When we worked together, he drove me and I drove him to be the best we could be. With his music, he elevated my films and all those he scored. In the music of cinema, he stands with a tiny group of masters. His scores were soaring, majestic, pulse-pounding, richly textured and above all, emotional. He wrote music from the heart and he had a big, beautiful heart." Jeff Bond was working on the 2015 soundtrack release of Braveheart when he heard the news.
A few weeks after we finished work on the album, Mike Gerhardt, who runs the record label with Matt Verbois, called me and told me that Horner had just been killed in a plane accident. This was in the morning the day he died, so it must have been very shortly after the accident. And because the record company had been in contact with James's agent, and they had apparently phoned the label right away because we were in the middle of finalizing the album. So I and a few other people knew that Horner had died, but it really was not known to the world for another 4 hours or so.
Mel Gibson wrote, "James Horner was a rare artistic genius. He did not merely augment the image he was presented with. He was able to transcend its matter and logic and travel straight to the heart and soul with his magical gift. A gift that truly reflected his own heart and soul. I will miss him." However, at the time of Horner's death, there were still 2 films to be released that would have music composed by James Horner. Southpaw was originally meant to be a vehicle for rapper Eminem, before eventually starring Jake Gyllenhaal. Due to the film's low budget, the director Anton Farquhar was going to return to his collaborator on his previous film to write the score. However, when Horner offered to write the score for free, Farquhar jumped at the opportunity. So moved by the story of a boxer getting his life on track after losing his wife in a tragic accident and his daughter to Child Protective Services that the composer insisted that he should write the score covering all the crew costs from his own pocket. The 33 was based on the true account of the 2010 mining disaster, when 33 miners were trapped inside the San Jose mine in Chile for more than 2 months. The film starred Antonio Banderas, Rodrigo Santoro, Juliette Binoche, Lou Diamond Phillips and James Brolin. With the budget tight as per Southpaw, Horner employed an ensemble of string orchestra with the addition of guitar, ethnic Andean woodwind instruments and synthetic elements. In the CD notes, director Patricia Riggin said this about James Horner: "James is one of the most gifted artists of our time, and his contribution to our film is immeasurable. The music he created is everything I could have hoped for and more. It effortlessly transitions from soaring to dynamic to soft and intimate, perfectly capturing the heart and soul of the story." In the spring of 2015, whilst finishing the score for Southpaw, director Anton Farquhar and Horner discussed the director's next project, an ambitious remake of the classic 1960 western, The Magnificent Seven. Horner knew that he had to write a score that acknowledged Elmer Bernstein's classic theme and score in a 21st century way. The challenge energised Horner and excitedly started working on themes with his collaborator Simon Fraglin, whilst Farquhar started filming in Louisiana, with stars Denzel Washington, Chris Pratt and Ethan Hawke. Sadly, a week later Horner died, and it seemed inconceivable that Horner's music would ever be heard. However, the composer's trusted main group of collaborators, music editors Jim Henriksen and Joe E. Brand, with orchestrator J.A.C. Redford, encouraged engineer Simon Rhodes and Fraglin to finish prepping the London themes so they could at least be presented to Farquhar to listen to. A couple of weeks later, Fraglin was on the set of The Magnificent Seven, playing the music to an astonished director who was overwhelmed by this unexpected gift from his departed friend. Music that so perfectly got the essence of the movie that Farquhar was making without ever seeing a frame of it. So began a 9-month process of finishing the final ever film score, which has James Horner's name attached to it, with Fraglin adapting Horner's themes to the film and receiving co-composer credit for his efforts. Adam Cousins.
Magnificent Seven, I think, was always going to be a bit of a disappointment initially, because you're sort of thinking, here comes James Horner's last ever score, or last ever released score. And I think Simon Fraglin did a really, really good job pulling together James Horner's music, or what he wrote for that particular film. And it must have been quite a difficult job, because there must have been gaps here and there that he sort of pulled together. And because he's worked with him for so long, it still, to me, sounded like a James Horner score. And I hate to hark back again to the 80s, but the opening, that you get that sort of echoing, quite literally, of Battle Beyond the Stars, which obviously in itself was based on The Magnificent Seven, albeit in the Japanese style. It was just fantastic. And it's one of those scores, I think, that repays extra listenings, because there's always going to be that thing where you listen to something that's kind of hyped up, not massively in the public eye, but certainly amongst like-minded people where you listen to this sort of thing, and you sort of think, well, yeah, it was okay, and then you play it again and you think, actually, no, I like that, and then again and again. And it feels, the more you listen to it, like a James Horner score, which ultimately it is.
Erik Woods.
This is one of the toughest scores to listen to, because you knew this was going to be the last thing that James Horner had written, and yet it wasn't completely his, but it's still an amazing gift that Horner left to us. And his brilliant team, including Simon Fraglin and Simon Rhodes, assembled this score as a labor of love, a fitting final tribute to their friend. What's most remarkable about this score is that the themes that Horner had written for Farquhar before filming still made their way into the score. And Fraglin really wanted to make sure that those themes stayed, even though throughout the evolution of any film and production, things obviously get shuffled around a bit. But those central themes were still in the film as written by James Horner. Everything that made James Horner great in his career, everything that made him memorable and controversial as well, is in this score. It's just a wonderful tribute to everything that made Horner Horner. On top of being a tribute to Horner, it was also a tribute to the legacy of the great Elmer Bernstein, and quotes from his classic 1960 original score to The Magnificent Seven crept its way into the music in the most classy way possible.
Robert Daniels.
I will say this about The Magnificent Seven. It did have elements of Thunderheart in it, but again, it worked well, considering that he wrote the score for the director and before the director had even shot a single frame of film. And it really comes across of a really great score. And again, his swan song to the industry. I mean, a lot of people thought Southpaw and the 33 were his final, but The Magnificent Seven, I think, will be the score that he will leave that musical voice for the audience, and it will not be forgotten anytime soon.
James Horner always had his critics over his music. The charge of borrowing from other compositions and using excerpts and themes from classical composers continued to be thrown at him right up to the end of his life and beyond. However, towards his untimely end, James Horner had finally realised and saw how much pleasure his music gave to people around the world. This may have meant more to him than the 2 Academy Awards, 6 Grammys, 2 Golden Globes, 3 BAFTA nominations and all the other awards he had won over a film music career lasting 37 years with over 158 credits to his name. Away from the scoring stage, Horner had many interests and hobbies, but there was one pursuit that stood out, one that would eventually cost him his life, but throughout his career was celebrated so memorably so many times in his music. In 2010, Horner was asked by an aerobatic team, the Flying Horsemen, to write a piece of music to accompany their show. He was told to write what he felt about flying, to write what was in his soul. Horner wrote 2 pieces, a 4-minute piece called The Fourth Horseman, referring to himself flying with the team, and a 12-minute tour de force, In Your Soul, which practically shows the composer's love of flying in musical form, leaving absolutely nothing to the imagination.
There's plenty of people I've met at certain film music festivals and film workshops who would always cite Horner as being one of the reasons why they were so interested to write music for film. And I think Horner should always be, regarding the whole writing for flight and knowing how to make your heart soar, I think there will never be anyone better than James Horner. As much as I adore John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, James Newton Howard, Hans Zimmer, Patrick Doyle, so many great composers, I think Horner, when it comes to the flying cue, it's been said by many other people, I think he just knew how to nail it.
He had such a singular voice, a singular style. He did things that no one else has ever done, for good or bad. I hear some of his style in some early Christopher Young scores, because, you know, John Williams is different, Jerry Goldsmith is different, but I don't think anybody's going to be able to do what Horner did. It's such a hard thing, finding that right emotion. And I know there are composers that do it, feel the music, feel the scenes with the music underneath it, but there was just something about the way that Horner did it, and I don't know whether it's a certain combination of notes or the way that he attacked films. He's going to go down as one of the greatest of all time, and I think that was felt after his death. I have never seen Facebook and Twitter explode like that before, and I know, you know, when you get famous people that everybody knows, but his death was, I mean, the way it was so sudden, so very tragic, especially since he was doing something that he loved, and that was flying. And you could tell that that was something that he loved, especially in his music, because some of the flight cues that he wrote were probably some of the best pieces of music, most inspiring pieces of music that he ever wrote.
James Horner's passing has left a huge gap in which the world of film music has found very difficult to fill. He leaves behind a legacy as one of the all-time greats in his field, with music to discover, enjoy and revisit, today, tomorrow and forever.
The Man Who Scored the two biggest films ever is the most phenomenal title for somebody like that. But I think my description of James Horner would be a man who clearly loved film, a man who clearly loved drama, a man who knew how to score to drama better than just about any other composer. And I think his legacy will just be the fact that he's written these perfect scores. The man who can just perfectly accompany it with music, like to every part of the emotion and pick up all of that in the score. And I think that's just what he just has done so well and left a legacy of amazing scores, working over 3 to 4 decades. Just incredible.
I think he'll be long remembered. He's a composer who was taken from us well before his prime, and that was just so sad that he left us. I think the great thing, though, is that there's just so much music that's in his films that we can appreciate. There's music that we can appreciate apart from those films. There's a lot of albums representing his scores. And perhaps 100 years from now, if we sift through what happened during the 20th century, and in particular in film music, I think there will be some pieces that will really stand the test of time. There'll be things that are talked about in future. And this goes for many composers. A lot of them have their own pieces that will come through the decades and through the years. But Horner, with his particular approach to those long kind of concert, classically themed pieces, it wouldn't surprise me if at some point in the future we'd see things like that finale from Field of Dreams being performed in a concert hall. We would see some of these greater pieces that he's written performed with real orchestras, with an audience there sitting to listen to them.
It sort of falls under the corny old adage of you never know what it's got till it's gone. And I think that those days won't come again, and those kind of scores won't come again. It is not the license to do whatever you want to do, which Horner was able to operate in, particularly in those early years. I think that my friend John Burlingame will be teaching James Horner at USC in his film music courses in the coming years more and more because of what we have lost. Not just losing James Horner, the composer, physically, but in fact losing a whole style of film scoring which has gone and will never come again. And I think James Horner will always be thought of as the last in that line. He was the last great composer who knew how to really make film music soar, and I do not believe his like will ever come again.
What I hope is that people will say, I like how I feel when I listen to a James Horner score to a film. I like how that movie's made. And I hope that it's filmmakers that bring it back, because that will be his influence. And I hope that musicians say, how did he do it? And that they try to seek out and try to emulate it and try to have these old-fashioned things that it's a human breath, it's a human feeling, it's a human thing that pushes forward, and that you make it as handmade, as personal, as human as possible. And so if I had to say what I hope, people will come away saying, boy, what did James Horner and those guys seem to know that got them to this point, that lifted it all up? And what they seem to know is that they internalized the movie and they would bring it in live with it, have it sort of rumble around. And then once it brought something out of them that was inside them, then it would come out again. And that's what I hope people remember, that James is one of the very, very finest film composers that has ever lived. And I hope that that's what his legacy is. And I hope that we don't forget that.
Music composed by James Horner Part 3 was narrated by Amanda Barrow and written, produced, recorded and edited by Jason Drury for Cinematic Sound Radio.